Good afternoon. People are trickling into our webinar as we speak, and the subject of today's meeting is to define and address the way we think of climate resilience within the Climate Ready Workforce for Coastal States, Tribes, and Territories competition. There are a lot of concepts presented in this NOFO that are very important for meeting the objectives that NOAA has. And some of them may be more familiar than others. And the objective then today is to make sure everyone has a common understanding of what we mean by resilience, climate resilience, and job roles that can enhance climate resilience. I'm going to speak up front about the competition in general. We yesterday held a webinar. My colleague Joshua Brown from Sea Grant gave an overview of how to apply for this competition, what the structure of the solicitation is, and the way that it would be best to address the different components in the NOFO, the Notice of Federal Opportunity. And I will refer you to the website at seagrant.noaa.gov/CRW to get a copy of that recording if you missed that webinar, because it presents the very essential information you need. My focus is defining resilience as a concept, and then what we mean by the phrase enhance climate resilience within this NOFO. In addition, our team, the team of people who put together this competition, have come up with a series of scenarios that describe job roles and climate enhancement skills that one could perform in those jobs, just to illustrate the categories and the scale and scope of how applicants might think about successfully applying for this webinar. All of the text, most of the text, with a few exceptions, in this presentation is directly from the Notice of Federal Opportunity. And where it differs, I will point that out. The reason I mention that is I will deviate in some cases just to emphasize we're not prescribing exactly what you should say in your proposal. We're providing illustrations to help you see the way you can conceive of your project in alignment with our objectives. So with that in mind, we'll dive in. This federal opportunity is titled the Climate Ready Workforce for Coastal States, Tribes, and Territories. And there, throughout this summer, are a series of webinars just like this. It's the second of 5 webinars in which we are providing background information about how to successfully apply for funds. I've given you the URL here, and I believe that Amara, who is capably supporting us on the back end here, can put the URL into the chat so that you can access the NOFO information directly. But very importantly, each of the recordings of these webinars is getting posted to that website, along with the American Sign Language interpretation, video, and captions. Also, we are recording all questions and answers and putting together a written document of that text, posting that to the website so that when we don't have the benefit of Ms. Williams, who's doing the interpreting for us today, thank you, Vernice, you would still, that information would be accessible in written form. So the Q&As are preserved as a supplement to the video. As Joshua pointed out yesterday, this is a program that is being funded under the Inflation Reduction Act, specifically to address existential threats of the climate crisis. And our goal is very much to put people into good jobs. So recruitment and training, but placement of workers in those good jobs is an essential element for a successful proposal. And with that in mind, I will refer you for the definitions of good jobs to the presentation that Joshua gave. He went through all the criteria that constitute a good job, and they're very specific. They have to do with wage, capacity to advance along your chosen career path, equity, and so forth. My focus is very much on the enhancing climate resilience piece today. So if you have questions about what is a good job, I'll refer you back to Joshua's presentation. He's also going to be giving a replay of that content at a future date. We are working across NOAA to deliver this program. The National Sea Grant Office is hosting the $50 million competition, which is based on a Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration program called Good Jobs Challenge. The NOAA Climate Program Office, for whom I work, is supporting the climate resilience technical assistance components of this grant. We're also hosting and developing the knowledge sharing platform, toolkit.climate.gov, which will be where we share information about climate resilience and the outcomes and outputs from this program. And to that end, we're doing reporting and monitoring. Sea Grant and the Climate Program Office are collaborating with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management to deliver training about climate resilience throughout the period of performance of this grant. So this is a program that spans many different aspects of NOAA, and we're excited to deliver it to you and to see what innovation comes from the public and private sector partners who come forward in this competition. In the NOFO, you'll see a figure, this figure. And the idea is to present to you how to form a partnership that could be a successful applicant partnership. There is a single applicant, a backbone organization. That applicant has the convening authority to bring together businesses, large or small, public sector and private sector employers. Now, a successful partnership doesn't have to constitute all of those, but at least one employer must be present to be successful, because successful applicants must place people in jobs. On the other side of the diagram, on the left side, represented by red circles, are strategic partners who bring value to the partnership through providing training, understanding business practices across a sector, understanding how to deliver services, and importantly, we require that a NOAA affiliated entity have some role in a successful project. So this is a stylized representation meant to cover any partnership, but your specific proposal doesn't have to have 8 different specific partners. We just enumerated the categories that you might include within your partnership. Let's move on to the subject of resilience. I promised it many times. So I'm going to use a figure and I'm going to build out using this graph as a template. And in this graph, on the y-axis, we're representing quality of life. So if that might be a business service that you provide in your business, it might be any service. And during normal operations, you deliver at a certain level, which is represented by a dashed line and is labeled business as usual. So through time, you expect to deliver this service. And in the face of a climate-related hazard, an acute hazard, there may be a disruption to your normal operations. Moving through time, after that disruption, you would expect your business to recover. That would be an idealized normal pattern we'd like to see in all cases when Americans are disrupted by climate-related hazards. But if a hazard is particularly harsh or acute, you may have a very severe disruption in the delivery of the service or goods that you provide. And in that case, there may be a permanent loss of capacity. In other words, there is not 100% recovery in this situation. If that eventuality occurs over time, multiple times, there may be long-term stress and degradation in the delivery of services, say, to a particular area. And in that case, we see a degradation. And there are communities around the nation where we can point to this as the level of services declines over time due to continual stress. For example, economically disconnected areas around cities sometimes might have food deserts, might have a lack of services of any of a variety of types of services. In that case, there needs to be a building up of capacity, both to address long-term stress and the potential for increased frequency or intensity of climate-related stress. And so investments can be made in your business, in your service provision prior to an event, so that there's a higher level of service as a baseline, and the same acute hazard I showed before, rather than leading to a permanent loss and a degradation of service, instead you can see your service recover completely. So a more resilient system can recover and has a higher level service, and a less resilient system might have a permanent loss following acute climate-related hazards, especially as the intensity and frequency of climate-related hazards increases through time. So all of that information is summarized in these slides, which I'll just put up for a few seconds so you can digest all of that information. This is a very conceptual definition of resilience. And what we have done is then enumerated some of the ways that job roles can address enhancing climate resilience. And we'll switch to that section in just a moment and invite Ms. Butler to join us as interpreter. Thank you. So enhancing climate resilience is a phrase that you'll see throughout this notice of federal opportunity. We have 4 ways that we define enhanced climate resilience. But before I get too deep into those 4 definitions, I want to be absolutely clear about this statement, and I'm going to pause and let you read this. So to be clear, we do support resilience efforts that include greenhouse gas mitigation, but the focus needs to very clearly demonstrate improving quality of life in the face of climate-related hazards per se. So that is the set of benefits we're focused on, and a co-benefit could be reducing greenhouse gas emissions through time. We are very focused on improving quality of life to climate-related hazards in this Notice of Federal Opportunity. So the first component of enhancing climate resilience addresses equity. So we need to understand how people's disproportionate impact from climate-related hazards might affect their resilience in an ongoing way. So, for example, being able to articulate the ways that the precedents of a community forming might put people into a position of being more exposed, vulnerable, or at risk to climate-related hazards. And understanding history, therefore, is an essential idea behind characterizing the problems, the challenges, and the opportunities for addressing climate resilience. Second aspect of equity-centered climate resilience in the NOFO is including diverse perspectives and voices in identifying the priorities for resilience. So we know, for example, very clearly there are many examples where we can document, say, financial impacts from climate-related hazards. But those don't always characterize the full impact on a community. What about getting to work? What about getting your children to school? Those aren't always those impacts and disruptions in service are not always characterized well by, say, a financial analysis. So if we can bring more voices into the room when we're articulating what we're trying to build resilience for, we can understand better how to prepare for those potential impacts. And finally, for the equity-centered component of climate resilience, we're very interested in community buy-in and demonstrating that the community supports an approach to identifying potential impacts before, during, and after they occur. And similarly, community might help articulate what their strengths are that they want to preserve before, during, and after an event. So that community participation process is a skill that we see being integral to equity-centered climate resilience. All three of these, or any of them, would be a qualifying job role that's informed by equity-centered climate resilience. So let's move on to the idea of reducing, oops, I may have muted. Can you hear me? I'll just ask Ms. Butler, thank you. The next set of climate resilience skills deals with reducing exposure, vulnerability, and risk to climate-related impacts. So at NOAA, we are deeply invested in climate science and knowledge. We develop climate models which are very sophisticated and look at global patterns in circulation of the atmosphere and the ocean and their interactions. We're very interested in how those data, especially dealing with projections into the future, can be interpreted and used to evaluate changing risk. So the skill of applying that information is very important for understanding resilience to future risk, but also the observations, the foundational knowledge and theory of climate science and meteorology are components of bringing a climate literate workforce to bear on resilience challenges. Those are the types of things we're interested in seeing you do in your response to this NOFO. Also, evaluate the potential impacts of climate-related hazards so that we can also understand return on investment. So as the field of climate resilience evolves into the future, we know that we need to measure the baseline where we are today, what we're doing to address it, and how we've actually saved money, time, lives, livelihoods, quality of life. Your ability as an applicant to demonstrate that you can show us the baseline you're moving from is an important component of advancing a broader understanding of how to enhance climate resilience society-wide. To that end, measuring initial conditions is truly an essential component of demonstrating to the reviewers that your proposal will be able to address a very specific problem. If you can measure what it is, you can do something about it, and you can show that to the reviewers, you'll be in a better position to be evaluated well for this skill. And evaluating and measuring the actions themselves. So actions can be tied to addressing a population, a resource, your service delivery. And if you've been able to measure an impact and a baseline, then you can also evaluate how your actions through time have improved the resilience for your business or community. And I think this is the final component for this category of skills, is showing that you can develop a funding and finance plan for a resilience project that has a longer lifetime than the period of performance of this grant. That's a skill that's needed to expand and accelerate resilience nationwide. And we'd like to see those skills developed, shared, and multiplied around the nation. The third category of enhancing climate resilience skills deals with actually building and improving our nation's infrastructure and systems to deal with climate-related hazards. So in this category, we're not just talking about gray infrastructure, the things that we build out of concrete, steel, and so forth, but also nature-based solutions. NOAA has invested a lot of time and attention. You'll find a lot of material with NOAA partners that focuses on the application of nature-based solutions to climate-related hazards. But reducing climate-related vulnerability and risk may also incorporate other components of different business sectors, healthcare, service delivery more broadly for social systems. So being able to reduce people's vulnerability and risk through the development of your project will favorably predispose people toward your proposal. So what do we mean? You might be addressing people, you might be addressing assets, you might be addressing natural resources and species and ecosystems. Any of these is fair game for the focus of your partnership. Or you may tell us another category that you're focused on for reducing vulnerability and risk, or it's essentially improving function before, during, and after a climate-related hazard. You can also propose to us that there are other skills that we have not enumerated or described in this NOFO. So we don't presuppose that we understand every possible way to address climate-related hazards in your community, in your business. So, but you do have to convince us that you understand the idea of climate resilience and that we've missed something important and that you have that solution. We look forward to seeing those applications that can do so. And you may be able to draw on existing climate resilience plans, an employer's strategic plan, or the guidance of resilience experts that you bring into your project. Those would be very compelling sources to draw on when you're in your application, so that the reviewers understand that you've carefully considered the climate-related hazards in your business and community, and you have a solution for addressing them. Now, I mentioned resilience experts, and throughout the Notice of Federal Opportunity, we refer to climate service practitioners, people who are able to interpret climate information and put it into context of the needs of communities and businesses in your region or a whole business sector. Those people exist who are able to interpret the climate system and understand different business sectors' needs. And we see them in academia, in the public and private sphere, in nonprofits and for-profit business, at all levels of government and tribal nations. And they might draw on a lot of different skills: planning and facilitation, those soft skills that involve working with people, or some of the hard sciences around data science and spatial analysis and earth systems, engineering, and bringing all of that together through management, project management, community engagement, and hazard mitigation. We know that there are just a wide variety of skills that are needed in different aspects and stages of building a climate resilience plan and enacting it. We're very interested in seeing how the respondents to this NOFO are integrating those skills specifically into job placement. We have some printed material, and this is not specifically mentioned in the Notice of Federal Opportunity. So each of these bullets here has a URL link that we will post to the Sea Grant website for this NOFO. And the first in this list is a practitioner guide for implementing the steps to resilience, which is a risk assessment, planning, and implementation framework on the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. The second resource listed here is a technical paper on recommended strategies for getting resilience strategies funded. A lot of that focuses on how to involve community. It's very aligned with the way we've written this federal opportunity. The third resource focuses on centering equity in climate resilience planning, and includes references and resources for more context about all of those criteria that I listed under, that we put into the NOFO, dealing with equity-centered climate resilience. The fourth bulleted document on this list deals with how to do monitoring and evaluation of resilience actions. And the final one deals with nature-based solutions. So I'm certain these resources can help you think in practical terms about ways you might respond to this NOFO while referring to existing approaches that have been tested in the field. The URL at the bottom of this page, we'll make sure to post into the chat. And I regret to say to Amara, I do not have that URL to paste into the chat, so I'll have to do it after the talk here. But this link is part of the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, which is linked within the NOFO. I'm going to pause here for a moment and just say we could take a couple of questions that deal with this section of the talk in which we talked about skills. Amara, if you'd like to break in, and if there are any pressing questions right now, we can take about 5 minutes.
All right, perfect. We have 2 questions. And if you don't mind just leaving that slide up with the link, I can go ahead and type it in.
Thank you.
So our first question is regarding the goal, recruit, train, and place workers in good jobs that enhance climate resilience. Could a qualified scenario be developing training that can be executed for current workers to increase their skill set for climate resilience? Or does the training have to focus on those who are not working and will become future workers?
Okay, that is an excellent question. And the first part of the question asks whether training of existing workers is acceptable. There is a scenario in which that would not be responsive to this NOFO, where you're providing training and then you have an enhanced workforce, but you haven't hired them into a new job. They haven't gotten promoted. They're not on a career path that's different, and they've not essentially made a move. You are enhancing the workforce, I would agree, but to be responsive to this NOFO, we are looking to fill new jobs that are needed in the marketplace. So hopefully that is a fine point that that is clear now. The second part of the question, if you will please repeat it, Amara.
Yeah, the second part of that question is, does the training have to focus on those who are not working and will become future workers?
Certainly focusing on those who are not working is responsive, but this to be successful, you do not have to only focus on people who are not working and bringing them into the workforce. That would be a strong plus. But taking someone from a position that doesn't have a career pathway with advancement and putting them into one that does is responsive, or taking them from one job that is defined without a climate resilience component and now has an expanded set of responsibilities focused on climate resilience and also has opportunity for promotion, that is responsive. So that was an excellent, actually, very well framed two-part question. I think we have time for one more, Amara.
All right, so how do we find out which organizations qualify as a NOAA affiliated entity? This is a required component of the team, correct?
It is required, and we're going to have a webinar dedicated to this subject next week. And Amara, I'll just ask you to please post the date in the chat, or you can interrupt me now because I'd rather not scroll through the slides and make people dizzy.
No worries, I'll go ahead and post it in the chat.
Thank you. So we have provided a list of some of the NOAA affiliated entities on the Climate Resilience Toolkit. So I think to answer the question, first go to the toolkit, look at those resources, but also attend the webinar that my colleague Frank Niepold is going to be leading, that Amara is going to post a link to, which is coming up, I believe, next week. And if you have any questions, reach out to us and we will certainly clarify. But it includes any organization that is officially part of NOAA, any organization that is funded by NOAA that has an official NOAA affiliation, it qualifies. So within NOAA, you might reach directly to Office of Coastal Management personnel who are working on coastal resilience, and you might include them as subject matter experts. Or you might reach out to one of our funded programs in the National Integrated Drought Information System, or the CAP-RISA program. That's an acronym, CAP/RISA. And those funded programs are qualifying affiliated programs. So those were two excellent questions. I'm going to move on to the next section of the webinar, and we'll continue the Q&A a bit later. Thank you for those. As you move through the Notice of Federal Opportunity, you will see that we've put together 7 different scenarios that focus on how climate-informed skills can be incorporated into the new or enhanced worker roles that we envision creating through or supporting through the climate ready workforce. I want to remind everyone of one point that Joshua Brown made yesterday about requirements for this plan, in which, you know, he listed a series of requirements, one of which is that applicants must support one or more actions from the Ocean Climate Action Plan. And within that, there was the idea of promoting coastal community resilience strategies that are adaptive, equitable, and based on best practices. So here, coastal community is defined as being in a state, a tribal nation, or a territory that has a coastline, or is in the Great Lakes, or is in Washington, D.C. So the definition isn't coastal zone community. Communities that are in coastal states, tribal territories, or tribal nations or territories, excuse me. I wanted to clarify that one thing because we are looking for proposals that can go beyond the coastal zone and marine environments. And I need to make that clear up front. Now, we've developed 7 different scenarios, and there's sort of the category. What we're doing with these scenarios is defining number of jobs, roles, and the number of skills that are related to climate resilience. And these are only for illustrative purposes. These are not meant as recipes for what your proposal must do. So we're asking you to replace these scenarios with your own, and very deliberately, these are just placed there so you can consider how number of roles, number of skills, and geography might play into the way you define a successful application. So the first scenario is rather long. And rather than reading this whole thing right now, well, no, go ahead and read the whole thing. Let's just take a moment here. I think you'll agree that's a mouthful. There are a lot of terms. It's a lot to take in. So let's focus in on one phrase here for a moment. A partnership that trains 70 employees who were slated to be laid off. So this wasn't asked in the previous section, but it's related. You might have people who work in your organization, but they're going to be laid off because of redundancies or changes in the marketplace. So you decide in your partnership to train them and put them into new career paths. That is a qualifying concept under this NOFO. So this speaks specifically to the idea of the job. Now, the skill and role I've highlighted in the next slide here. So the role is going to be climate equity officers. These climate equity officers are going to have skill in establishing baselines, assessing risk, so that the financial institution can protect its assets in the face of climate-related hazards, and also the assets of investors. So that's one example. I'll move on to the next scenario. The next scenario involves one skill and multiple roles, and I'll give you a few seconds to read this scenario. Okay, so in this scenario, a business, a hospital in this case, has determined that there are a number of roles needed to address heat and health issues. We need heat health outreach specialists. We need nurses, home health care coordinators, people to visit homes, talk with patients, and help the patients themselves understand their own health risks and then address them. So the skill being developed for all of these people is dealing with heat and health exposure, vulnerability, and risk. So you might have a training system that works with our colleagues at heat.gov to understand how to apply information about changing risk to cardiovascular disease, mental health, um, infectious disease, and so forth from more frequent and intense heat waves, for example. So that's one skill, heat and health, multiple roles. The next scenario involves multiple skills, but just one job role. Take a moment to read this scenario. So in this case, people are being hired into essentially labor positions that have climate resilience skill in multiple areas. They have to understand erosion control, soils, basic civil engineering kind of principles. But they also need to understand, well, what plants are going to be successful in different habitat contexts, different soils, different slopes, different exposure to, to sunlight and moisture and so forth. They need to understand how to do wetland restoration. So there are a lot of different skills there requiring training, requiring support, but we're going to hire, in this case, this partnership is going to hire many, many people to do this work to implement a coastal resilience plan. In the next scenario, we're looking at, again, multiple skills, one role. And I'm giving you time to read this. So in this case, we're looking at information services providers, climate resilience officers. That's one role, but it requires a wide variety of skills for looking at social systems, looking at stormwater systems, transportation systems, and being able to work across different skill sets to translate climate information so that a resilience plan can be implemented. Multiple skills, one role. The next scenario, again, is multiple skills, one role. Probably don't need to go through all these in too much detail, but go ahead and read this one. So in this case, we know and we've heard and we want to address the issue of getting technical capacity into communities that have been underserved. And so this specifically calls out the need for capacity to use climate information in the context of community development from a community ground up. And that is a multifaceted job role, but it requires expertise in one person. And so training people to do this work across a whole area that is disadvantaged or in a lot of communities throughout a state or region would be a qualifying scenario. The sixth scenario here deals with multiple skills and multiple roles, and I'll give you a moment to read this scenario. So we know climate resilience is multidisciplinary, multifaceted, can be complex, and often the benefits are best realized when combining the needs of different departments, say in a municipal government. So it makes sense to train people in different departments with the same understanding of climate impacts, hazards, and then resilience actions so that their activities can be coordinated over time. And so in this example, the training, job placement, and ongoing interaction within a municipal government focuses on having the resilience plan implemented through multiple departments. And the final example is perhaps the most expansive geographically. Okay, so in this example, as the people who are attending this webinar already know very well, there's a fair amount of funding out there right now to support resilience activities. And if you're going to be successful getting and implementing getting funds to implement projects that address climate resilience, you're going to be looking across a diverse set of skills and roles. And in this case, we're looking at how to implement something for a whole city using a federal grant. So this could be a very large project and might necessitate pretty widespread training throughout a large city government context. So those are the scenarios we developed within the NOFO that give a sense of how we think reviewers will be able to assess the way you might implement our notions of enhancing climate resilience, the skills needed to do that, and put those in context for specific job roles. Those are essential steps for a successful grant application to the climate ready workforce. And I encourage you to not think of those scenarios as tightly defined boxes that you have to fit in, but rather open your mind to how you would, in the context of your own business, apply the concepts that I've presented here today. And with that, Mara, we have time to go into more questions.
All righty. So our next question is there a resource for tested approaches to assessing or monitoring resilience increases, or some guidance on standardized approaches to monitoring or assessing outcomes for this NOFO?
So NOAA has invested a fair amount of time and effort in addressing that question, but there is not one accepted way of monitoring and evaluating resilience. There are various toolkits and frameworks and approaches to doing that, and I provided a publication that goes through some of that material in this presentation. I would encourage the questioner to consult that document, but NOAA has invested in other projects also that look at this question. Specifically, we're asking applicants to climate ready workforce to address this question because there isn't one standard. So we are asking you to solve that problem in the context of your specific business or business sector.
All righty. Does a successful applicant have to prove that trainees will start a new job or a promotion during the time of the grant?
Yes. So I would refer you to also yesterday's presentation, which will be posted soon, a recording of which will be posted soon on the Sea Grant website. That the URL is on the slide here. But priority will be given to projects that can demonstrate that job placement occurs within 12 to 24 months of the beginning of the project. It is a rather essential element that job placement occur. If more time than that is needed, then probably there could be a successful application that makes a justification for a longer timeline, but priority will definitely be given to projects that can demonstrably show job placement definitely within the period or performance of the grant.
All right, so can a stipend be included to help offset the cost of initial job placement for the employer?
The stipend question and then the employer noun has me a little confused, because when I think of stipend, I think of employee. So I'm not sure. I might need that question to be clarified, but there certainly is provision within this NOFO to support the workers having stipends to get trained. If while they're being trained, they're not being productive in the workforce and they need support to do the training, that is a legitimate case can be made for requesting funds for that purpose.
If a renewable energy company is interested in being an employer partner for the project, would they qualify if the committed roles that are focused on the resilience of the grid and power supply, for example, to reduce power outages in coastal communities, especially those most vulnerable?
Definitely. That is very responsive to the objectives of this grant. If they are specifically training people to address resilience to climate related hazards within that renewable energy company, that is responsive to this NOFO.
Can you blend several scenarios together, having different tracks to train people that say on track one, learn how to do the on the ground restoration in climate resilience, and in track two, would learn the skills to help towns or municipal partners build technical capacity for climate resilience?
You can. I think the case would need to be made that the job placement for both sets of people fits logically within the partnership you're proposing, and that there's a coherence to the way together those businesses are working towards a shared climate resilience goal.
Within the NOFO, is there funding, within the notice of funding opportunity, is there funding to purchase the training curriculum for these new resilience jobs?
To purchase training curriculum. That sounds, if I'm interpreting the question correctly, what I heard is it legitimate to purchase training for the purpose of a successful project? And I would say yes, that is an acceptable use of funds.
If the training will use novel computing cyber infrastructure, such as new open source software in a cloud computing environment, can the fund be used to purchase or build the cyber infrastructure?
Excellent question. Joshua, prepare to unmute if you will, but there are specific provisions whereby we do not pay for infrastructure, actual building and construction. So if the proposal hinges on putting in place infrastructure and you're hiring people to do that, that would definitely be responsive. And Joshua, I'll just invite you to chime in this was an interesting question.
Yeah, so the details are you couldn't build a building, but you could put in the necessary cyber infrastructure, for example, networking and stuff to support computers for training, that sort of thing. That is allowable. So it depends on what you mean by infrastructure. And we'd invite you to reach out and follow up with the specifics, and we compare that with the NOFO.
Thank you, Joshua. Appreciate your chiming in there.
Can an organization with presence in multiple states list scenarios for each state within the proposal or apply separately for each state?
Interesting. So in this, well, we do allow proposals of up to, I believe, $10 million. So they could have a multi-state proposal. And there's no reason not to if the logic of tying these together is strong. So I hope that is a sufficient answer.
How will the priority of placement within 12 to 24 months affect design applications, or is that prioritization only for implementation applications?
Joshua, I'll invite you to come back off mute as well for this one. I do believe you addressed a question about design applications yesterday, and the answer to that was there did need to be a clear path to hiring people. So we might have to get back to the questioner on this one. Joshua, do you have another answer?
Yeah, specifically, if you're only doing a design project, there still needs to be a path to implementing that design. If it's not with our funding, it's with somebody's funding, so that there is still that commitment to hire, because part of design is securing those employer hiring commitments.
And we will be tracking those commitments to hire as well as the follow through on them as part of this program. So it is a strong, firm priority that this funding lead to job placement and enhancing career pathway opportunities for people.
Will this funding enable expenses covered to expand or establish facilities that produce coastal resilience products and increase jobs in coastal resilience? For example, a marine manufacturing facility that produces breakwaters, seawalls, and restoration products, and hiring teams to run, produce, and implement projects.
From the infrastructure side of the breakwaters and the actual projects, there's I do believe let me think about this for a moment.
I can take this one, Ned.
Go ahead.
So if I understand
on building, yeah.
If I understand the question, it's could you expand the manufacturing facility to give yourself space to hire workers? The answer is no. You couldn't use these funds to expand the facility. You could use them to recruit, train, and place additional workers. But expanding the facility for the manufacturing would need to come from some other source of funding.
To follow that, if the facility building is not covered, could equipment be purchased?
If it is for purposes of training the workers, yes. It is not for expanding the business itself.
I think that's all we have, unless anyone has final burning oh wait, there we go. Final burning questions. The NOFO appears to require a plan for continuation after the funding period ends. Does building the training program within academia and continuing the program as a continuing education program or academic certificate or degree program qualify for that requirement without specific employment guarantees moving forward?
The purpose of the NOFO is of the program is to fund the projects that place people into jobs. If part of the sustainability plan is ongoing continuing education after those commitments to hire have expired, a case can be made that that is project continuance, but that would probably not be weighted as highly as a project that showed there was an ongoing engagement with an industry or sector for placing people into jobs. So it's not entirely unresponsive, but this funding is not intended to support education, training, and hoping that people get hired. It's meant to support people getting hired. And I see we've lost one of our interpreters, and I wanted to take a moment to thank Ms. Vernice Williams, and I believe I didn't get Ms. Crystal's last name, but go ahead, Amara.
Crystal Butler.
Ms. Crystal Butler for the American Sign Language interpretation for this webinar. We appreciate that. And Amara Davis, who's been capably running the show in the background, thank you. I never really introduced myself. I'm Ned Gardner with the NOAA Climate Program Office, and I do look forward to these applications. I can stay on for a few minutes now to continue answering questions if there are any remaining ones, and we will write down and transcribe those questions and answers.
Yep, we have 4 more questions, if that's all good.
Please continue. Thank you.
The interpreters will have to go.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
All right, just for clarification, can the backbone organization be the employer and the one providing training? For example, we are hiring and training.
Yes.
Could the funding be used for the academic courses in renewable energy?
Yes, as long as the other stipulations that we mentioned about resilience are being addressed.
To follow up to a previous question, are there any resources that do help fund expanding or scaling infrastructure for coastal resilience projects?
So yeah, this funding for this is not for infrastructure per se. So I think Joshua's answer before, two different answers address this already.
So the question is, are there other funding sources?
Oh, excuse me.
There are some additional competitions that NOAA is holding right now. The one that is perhaps most relevant would be the climate resilience accelerators. Those are focused on supporting innovative businesses related to climate and ocean resilience. The links for those are on the NOAA website, and I am desperately Googling them. But I will also try and put it in the chat here so that it is included in the transcripts. Here we go. There is also a, if I put this in the chat, does that work? Do people see that, Amara?
I can get it to everyone.
Okay, and there is also a climate regional challenges. So those are more for implementing projects, but you might check both of those. And there is also work with your potentially not NOAA funding, but things like the Small Business Administration might have resources as well. But I don't know as much about those.
All right, we have a few more questions coming in. Is renewable energy considered climate resilience for purposes of workforce development, training, and placement?
There was another question about renewable energy that specifically highlighted resilience to climate hazards. So if the renewable energy is focused on solving a problem of disruptions in energy supply following climate-related hazards, then yes, that would be responsive. Renewable energy as a category is neutral. There must be a demonstration that there is a resilience to climate-related hazards, and specifically the components that we addressed in the webinar today. So, for example, maintaining energy supplies for communities that have been historically disadvantaged or subject to disruptions in power supply following flooding, thunderstorms, fires, that would be responsive. I hope that was a clear answer.
Is award size dependent on the number of good job commitments by project employer partners? For example, some funding opportunities use a pay-for-performance award model. Does the IRA Climate Ready Workforce Program determine award amounts in a similar fashion?
We do not have a criterion in the evaluation of the proposals that specifically names the ratio of dollars spent to jobs created. The criteria that Joshua laid out yesterday are the criteria that will be used to weight proposals.
Can funds be used to accommodate expenses to provide bilingual train eligible ready to work? I'm sorry, let me make sure that I'm getting this. Can funds be used to accommodate expenses to provide bilingual training for eligible ready to work individuals with English language skills deficiencies so they can be successful once placed?
I think a case can be made as long as the other criteria we discussed are addressed. That I see no reason not to.
All right, I think unless there are burning questions, we got everyone taken care of. And just as a reminder, all of the links that we discussed will be available within the PDF on the website. And anything that we dropped in the chat, we'll make sure that that's available after the webinar, as well as the recordings.
Excellent. Thank you, Amara, for your capable behind the scenes orchestration, and Joshua for joining. It's been my pleasure to present today. Bye-bye.